Iran is, I think, at the moment, militarily overwhelmed by the firepower of the United States. And the number of ships that the US is sending to surround Iran is now greater than before. So again, I don't think Iran, will be able to win this war militarily, frankly.
Lina, let me just start with, I think, probably quite a simple one. Going to get more complicated as we go on, I'm sure. Look, Iran just does not have the firepower of America, does it? So just first of all, how much less firepower are we talking? What is Iran capable of militarily in an offensive capacity?
Obviously, Iran has ballistic missiles. And in fact, as you know, this has been one of the big issues for Iran's destabilizing role in the Middle East, that it wasn't just, and probably still is, trying to develop nuclear weapons. It also possesses a ballistic missile program that, frankly, had gone largely unaddressed by the international community because the focus was always just on the nuclear issue. And now we are seeing that the ballistic missiles are also a devastating problem, as many people in Israel will now testify. However, having said all that, Israel last year managed to practically destroy Iran's air defenses. A lot of these air defenses were supplied by Russia and were never replenished after Israel destroyed them. And now it seems that the intensity of Iran's attacks on Israel, even when it tries to launch these ballistic missiles, has somehow lessened over the last few days. To me, this says that even though Iran can still inflict significant damage on its neighbors, its firepower is being diminished significantly. And that is because it has the might of Israel and the United States facing it. And ultimately, militarily, this is a losing battle for Iran.
So given that disparity, why are they prepared to take this risk, that the type of rhetoric that might anger someone like Donald Trump, someone as unpredictable as Donald Trump?
Well, because they've always used this rhetoric. I mean, Iran has always, since the rise of the Islamic Republic in 1979, called the United States the Great Satan and called Israel the Little Satan. So this demonization of the US as the source of all evil in the world has been at the heart of the ideology of the Islamic Republic's regime. And so it's not about Donald Trump or any other president, really. This is the United States and this is Iran. And I think personally, when I look at US foreign policy towards Iran over the last, let's say 2 decades, I zoom in on the nuclear deal that former President Barack Obama championed. He really put that as a priority for his administration. And that, I think, has ended up causing more damage than good, because that deal ignored everything else that Iran was doing in terms of terrorist activities around the world, the ballistic missile program, destabilization in the Middle East, including the support for proxies like Hezbollah, Hamas, and others. And that has given Iran the opportunity to simply expand the threat that it poses. And in a way, unfortunately, the October 7, 2023 attacks were a consequence of this. So it is not surprising that Iran now will, look at the US as a main culprit and as a potential target as well. I mean, I don't think it's fanciful for the United States to look at what is happening right now and feel that the US probably needs to take some preemptive measures to prevent US targets from being attacked by Iran.
Well, let's get into those then, shall we? I mean, Iran has repeatedly told Israel's allies that, it would strike their Middle Eastern assets, wouldn't they, if they believed them to be involved in Israel's attacks. Honestly, it feels like months, doesn't it? It's been less than a week. Specifically in the United States case, what are we looking at here? What are those assets, and how much damage, given you've talked about the level of offensive capability Iran has at the moment, is it possible for them to actually do to those assets?
Iran can still damage US assets because the US has military bases. There's still US troops in Syria. There's US troops in Iraq. There are military bases in the Gulf. Iran can target those. Now, will Iran be able to completely destroy them? Probably not. The US is already sending aircraft carriers to the Mediterranean. The US is quite well prepared. However, we have seen Iran attack US bases in Iraq in the past. The attacks, I must say, were limited. And I don't think Iran can do wide damage. However, even a limited attack is enough for the US to say we are being attacked by Iran. It's also attacking our ally Israel, and therefore we need to intervene. Now, if Iran does that, of course, it would be suicide in the current context, because in the past, frankly, the US was quite tolerant. When it comes to these attacks on US assets in Iraq, the US did not attack Iran directly as a result. The US has exercised a lot of restraint, but we are now in a situation in which this war is an existential war for Israel and for Iran. And the US cannot afford to just be restrained in this context. Iran is proving that it is willing to go all out regarding Israel, and Israel is also seeing a once in a lifetime opportunity to eliminate this enemy that is the Iranian regime. And therefore, we are talking about a very different set of circumstances for the United States.
You took the word suicide straight out of my mouth. I mean, I realise that Israel is sort of this third party in this conversation we're having, but you do wonder why Iran would even contemplate it if they can't actually destroy those assets, those American assets in the region.
Because this regime is very rigid. As I said from the very beginning, it has pitched itself as a competitor for US dominance in the world, especially in the Middle East. It wants to present itself as a regional leader in the Middle East and to present itself as an alternative to what it calls a US imperialist project. And so to maintain this credibility, Iran cannot be seen in terms of its supporters to be just standing on the sidelines, not doing anything to show that it is in fact doing something active to implement this political and ideological stance that it has been projecting for decades. And the reason why Iran feels compelled to do that is because if it loses this degree of legitimacy that it has cultivated for itself, it feels that the regime will then most likely collapse. And what we are seeing here is Iran doing everything it can at almost any cost for regime survival. Even if it's completely foolish militarily, it feels it's better to kind of fight to the last breath than be seen to compromise.
There's a graphic in the Times today that shows roughly where all of the American naval ships are around Iran, and it really looks surrounded. We're talking the Arabian Sea, the Red Sea, just north of Israel too. Does Iran have the capability to do any damage to the American Navy?
They can and they have in the past, for example, the Strait of Hormuz, and also, of course, we've seen activity in the Red Sea. However, again, it's a matter of scale and capacity. Iran really, with its proxies weakened, with Israel having US military assistance, helping it, it's very difficult for Iran to fight wars on so many fronts at great intensity. And when it comes to the Red Sea, we have to remember that the Houthis in Yemen, who were a main actor in conducting attacks on ships in that part of the world, have basically signed a de-escalation deal with the US and Saudi Arabia. So they basically said, yeah, okay, we're not going to attack ships in the Red Sea, although that did not stop them from launching missiles at Israel, because that wasn't part of the agreement. So Iran is, I think, at the moment, militarily overwhelmed by the firepower of the United States. And the number of ships that the US is sending to surround Iran is now greater than before. So again, I don't think Iran, will be able to win this war militarily, frankly.
So those are their options sort of regionally. Something that occurred to me, I was thinking about the Mossad agents that have been in Iran recently. Is it possible that Iran has sort of similar agents around the world, maybe even in America, and that they might be looking at terror attacks actually on American soil?
This is a high possibility. One of the things I've been looking at is the financial operations for Iran's proxies in Europe, for example. These networks remain practically intact. And these are the networks that are connected to some of the sleeper cells and agents for Iran that are present around the world, not just in Europe. I mean, the network is really quite global in its operations. And it is definitely a likely scenario that Iran might be compelled to use that card if it feels that domestically it is losing the military battle. And therefore, it's important for the international community to realize that this war against Iran is not just Israel's war. This is actually a global issue.
Is it possible to imagine what an attack like that would look like? Are we talking cyber or are we talking actual violence?
Well, both. Iran is already conducting cyber attacks. There have been many attacks that many organizations around the world have been fending off, including in the UK. And so that can happen. And Iran, unfortunately, does have the ability to inflict some cyber damage in that way. But also, violent attacks are highly possible. And it's not like Iran hasn't done it before. There have been attacks by Iran and Hezbollah in Europe, in Latin America, and of course, elsewhere in the world.
Just back in the region briefly, there must be non-violent sort of ways that Iran would be looking at dealing with the region as well. I'm thinking, return to the blocking of commercial shipping, with the Houthis, who are sort of still there and still dealing with ships bound for Israel, aren't they? But also, I suppose, the disruption of oil production and indeed transportation generally.
Yeah, they can. But again, looking at the big picture, I think they can only do so much. I think personally, this is a regime that is on its last breath. It can use all its cards. And yes, there will be damage to Israel, unfortunately, and perhaps other places as a result. However, the big picture is one in which I think we're beginning to see the end of this regime in Iran.
And then one final one. We've talked all about the offense for Iran, to use an American sporting term, I guess. What about the defense, if we want to stick with that theme? Is there anything they can do to counter American aggression if they get involved? Particularly, I'm talking about these mop bombs that are being talked about for attacking Fordo.
Well, the bombs will do obviously irreparable damage if they are used, and it's difficult to predict, but I think it doesn't make sense for the objective of this campaign against Iran to be neutralizing its nuclear capabilities if a nuclear site is left fully functional. And so when it comes to Iran's defenses, well, we have seen what these kinds of bunker busters do in places like Lebanon when they were used against Hezbollah, such as the bomb that killed the leader of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah. So I don't think Iran can do much when it comes to the use of such, powerful weapons. And also Iran's outer layers of defense, its proxies in the region, have mostly been neutered, weakened. Iran can't rely on that anymore. It's left, I think, completely exposed. And also we have to remember that Israel would not have been able to achieve the goals of assassinating Iran's top leadership had Israel not had agents deeply infiltrating Iranian state institutions. And that means Iran has huge security vulnerabilities, which is only an advantage for the US and Israel in this campaign.